All right. In this video, I'm going to talk about the short stories that Philip K. Dick wrote in 1957. There are only two of them, but they're both very good, and they both really put a kind of a capstone on a lot of the themes that Dick has been playing with in some of his earlier writing. Now, if you haven't read the complete stories of Philip K. Dick, and this isn't actually all of them, there's a few that weren't published in this collection, but mostly those are stories that were kind of the shell of a novel. And of course, a lot of the themes of his novels are in these stories, but a couple were kind of almost literally like first drafts of novels, and they got published as novellas, and they weren't included in this series. It came out right after Philip Dick died. I think it's the mid-'80s. They originally came out, and since then they've been in print. They change, the titles change over time, and there's different editions, and I think there's a brand new edition of hardbacks that's a bit expensive, and there didn't seem to be that many in print. I didn't get a hold of them. So most people have these editions if they have read the complete stories of Philip Dick. They're also, of course, shorter anthologies that just take some of his more notable works, one-volume works and things like that. But here's what you got. Now, why I'm dwelling on this? Well, these are arranged in the 5 volumes pretty much, with a few exceptions, and I think it was more for marketing reasons that this was done, but they're pretty much arranged in the order that Philip Dick submitted them to his agent. Now that gives us a pretty good idea of when he wrote these, right? We can't know for sure, when he wrote a lot of these stories, but it's pretty fair to say that the rough order is comparable to the order he submitted them to his agents. The order of publication is radically different. Now, in my podcast, which I have a link to down below, and in my blogging I did on this earlier, I went at it based on order of publication. And that, in some ways, is kind of the wrong way to go at it, because if you really are interested in when Dick was thinking about things, you really have to go with how they were submitted to the editor. But I kind of committed to doing it by order of publication because I guess I'm a psycho. So that's how he did it. But anyways, the stories I'm going to look at today, one of them is kind of notable, and it's the Unreconstructed M. So if you take, so this is volume 4, the one titled The Minority Report, and other stories by Philip Dick, but they all have these notes on the back. And in some cases, we actually have some of Phil Dick's notes, things he wrote when anthologies of his work were published during his lifetime. But the other thing we got, if you look closely, is the first number is the date it was submitted to the editor, and the second date is the date that it was published and where it was published. So it's useful reference information if you have these volumes. Now, the Unreconstructed M was submitted to his editor in June of 1955. The previous story was submitted, that was Minority Report, the Minority Report. Well, recall mechanism is here, but I guess we don't have a date for when that was submitted to the editor or the agent. The Minority Report is the last one we know, and that was written 6 months earlier in 1954, right? And as I'll get to, the Unreconstructed M and the Minority Report are in some ways parallel works. They're exploring the same themes in slightly a different way, but they kind of do pair together, and they should sort of be read together. And it's interesting that Dick was thinking about criminal justice at this time in his career. Now, before Minority Report, he was publishing, or he was sending works out pretty regularly, and that goes all the way back to 1952 when he first started writing. Now, the first 3 volumes of this, the Paycheck, the We Can Remember for a Wholesale, although that was written quite late, that was thrown into this collection, I think, to have a tie-in to Total Recall, and then Second Variety. These were all published, or these were all written in 52, 53, and 54, and the order that they were published in really doesn't give you a really good idea of when he wrote those, because he sent all these works out to editors. Often there were many, many stories out to different magazines and publications, and they came back, and he had to resubmit them, and so he kind of, things came out when he could get them out, right? The Unreconstructed M shows a real turning point in Philip Dick's career. He would submit 2 more stories after this in the 1950s, both in 1959. They're War Game and Explorers We. And those would be published roughly around the time he submitted them. No, they were published in 59. They were written in the spring and the fall of 1958. Then there's not another story submitted to his editor until 63. And then there's a lot of them. And it seems, well, it doesn't seem, it's pretty clear that Dick had stopped writing short fiction in pretty much in 1954. And he wrote a few things, 3 works essentially, until 1963. So he takes almost a decade off from writing short fiction. And what was he doing during this time? Well, we all know he was writing novels. And that's really when he had some of his greatest novels were conceived and written and sent off for publication. So the Unreconstructed M, one of the stories I'm going to look at today, is notable because it was kind of the last short story he would write for a couple years. And then after that, he wouldn't really write any for 4 years. Okay, so let's talk about these stories. The Unreconstructed M first. This is a story that pairs very nicely with the Minority Report, and they should be read together and anthologized together and thought about together. And as I talked about in a previous video where I looked at the stories of 1956, I made the point that the Minority Report in some ways seems to be less about criminal justice and more about Cold War institutional politics. But of course, we are going to be bound to read the Minority Report as a story about the surveillance state and the criminal justice system, because that's really what is on our mind today. We're not just caring about these Cold War institutions or the conflict between the police and the army. This isn't as interesting to us nowadays as the surveillance state and how we treat convicts and how we treat prisoners and whether our system of criminal justice is fair. Right? That's very much in our mind these days with the mass incarceration problem and the surveillance, the NSA stuff. And so I was just talking about how it's kind of inevitable that we're going to read the Minority Report kind of in a different way than maybe Dick was thinking about the story. But nevertheless, there is an interesting concept about criminal justice here, and that, of course, is pre-crime. And that is a method by which crimes could be identified before they were committed. And it wasn't just murders and violent crimes. As the story explains, there are pre-crime units in the tax bureau and other things, and these departments actually would share information. So crime gets eliminated by stopping people before they commit the crime, and then preemptively prosecuting people for crimes they haven't committed. And then, of course, there's things we can think about that in terms of big data and how that can tie to the surveillance state. Now, the Unreconstructed M is a story that actually does this much better. It doesn't have the concept of pre-crime, but it has the concept of big data, and it does the big data idea a little bit more directly. And I think in this way, the Unreconstructed M is actually more of a relevant tale for us than the Minority Report, simply because the technology for what's in the Unreconstructed M, what takes place there, is with us much more than, because we don't have precogs in our world. That's a fantasy element of, or at least a science fiction element of his story. The Unreconstructed M is something we could see happening in this world. And I won't go into the details because it's kind of a involved plot, and there's some subplots and motives, but it's essentially a mystery tale, and it's about a frame job. And so it's a bit of a whodunit, and who framed this guy. And the story begins with a robot going into a building, planting evidence, then killing someone who walks in, and then turning into a television set. And then the rest of the story is the police trying to dissect how this happened. And I'm not going to say much more about the story except go into the method by which investigations are done in this world. Specifically, there are a number of specifiers that are collected at the site of the crime. Now, this could be things like, was there a smoker there, right? You can just, I guess, test the air. I think in this case, they found ash on the ground. Eye color or blood type or single or married. And so you need specifiers. You don't need any concrete evidence. You don't need any direct evidence. What police do is then collect as much circumstantial evidence as they can. Then they put the circumstantial evidence into a computer. And what the computer will do is then take this and look at everyone. So in this world, everyone is guilty until the computer proves them innocent by removing them based on specifications. So if there's a determination that the perpetrator was male, right, then all the women are innocent. Then they say, well, it's brown hair. Well, then everyone without brown hair is taken out. And eventually, if you have enough specifications, and the book says it's 9 or 10, you can get down to one or a handful of people. And usually when you have a handful of people, you can, then that's all the detective has to do is figure out from these 5 people, which is the most likely to have committed the crime. Often the other people are not on the same planet, or they're in another city, or they have no motive or whatever. So by that point, it becomes easy to figure out who did it. It also, of course, makes it very easy to frame people if you know that people's specifications. Of course, this system only works if the government has data on everyone, right? So it has a complete portfolio of every single person on the planet, which apparently they have. So here's a story about how the detective gets replaced by the computer, essentially. And then there's all these subplots in it that aren't that important. I think that's the heart of it. There's a little bit on the frontier as well, and I actually think it's an interesting aspect because I'm curious to know more and to study more and think more about how Dick looks at the frontier. And as I've said many times in some of my comments on Philip Dick, I think his fascination with the frontier is something that's been overlooked in his earlier works. And especially his later pessimism has kind of covered up his earlier optimism about the frontier as a place of human renewal and rebirth and reimagination. If I were to ask like where to find a turning point in Dick's view on the frontier, I might see it in this story. And that's because here the frontier is no longer a place of rebirth or cultural creativity, as you find in a lot of stories. Instead, it's the depository for criminals. And so if someone gets deemed a criminal, they're not executed, they're banished. And there's certainly shout-outs in this story to the concept of transportation that Britain used. Of course, even property crimes lead to people being banished. So instead of executing them, and they get sent to the frontier, and they're sent there with a little bit of money. And the idea is that it's going to take them so long to get back because it's so backward and so remote that most people take their whole lifetime to get back to Earth. So you don't have to execute people, you just send them off that way. And it's pretty clear here that the frontier is not a place anyone wants to go. They all want to go back. So the whole justice system is based on the idea that criminals want to get back to Earth, but it's too far away. And so they'll never get back. So the frontier is something that's just, people are always trying to go towards the core. And it starts, I guess it seems to me that Dick is starting to question whether the frontier has anything to offer us. And this is something he's going to explore a lot more in books like Martian Time Slip, The 36 Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, and other works that he's going to write before he even picks up another pen to start writing short stories again, or at least books he starts to think about. Anyway, so that's the Unreconstructed M. It's in the 4th volume of the collected stories. If you're cheap like me and you get the Citadel versions, it's in the Minority Report one. Okay, the second story Dick published in 1957, you can be found in the 3rd volume, which tells you it was written a little bit earlier, but not that much earlier than the Unreconstructed M. The story is called Misadjustment. So it was submitted to his editor in May of 1954, and it was published not until 1957 in Science Fiction Quarterly. This is a capstone work on Philip Dick's view of the posthuman. And in a way, maybe we can just say it's another posthuman work, but I'm sort of dreaming here, well, maybe not dreaming, but I think it would be an idea for someone to anthologize with some interesting commentary and analysis the posthuman tales of Philip K. Dick. Because you would have Misadjustment there, The Golden Man, The Crawlers, The World of Talent, Planet of Transients, Cyman, Heal My Daughter, what else? John's World, maybe. The Null, which I'll look at in an upcoming video. You could kind of look at all these together and then really do a thorough analysis of Dick's view of the posthuman, because it's something that evolves. It's something that he really plays with. Now, unlike some authors, like I'm thinking of Asimov's Robots here, where Asimov really had an idea of the robot and his stories all reinforce that idea. And they play within those rules. But he has a pretty clear idea of what the robot is and it means and how it will function. Dick, with the posthuman, of course he has a concept of the posthuman, but he really isn't very consistent on what he thinks this means. Like sometimes the posthuman is a threat to humanity, sometimes it's extra human or really posthuman. Sometimes the mutants are just, regular people that have abilities. Kind of like the X-Men, I guess. Sometimes they really are truly in their mind and the way they think and look at the world post-human, like in The Golden Man. Sometimes they're a threat, sometimes they're helpful, sometimes they're banal, like when they're just working for businesses, or in Captive Market, for instance, where the post-human simply is just trying to make a buck and taking advantage of people to make some money. So they range from like the truly epic and cosmic to the banal. So we couldn't make like a set of rules about Dick's post-human. But nevertheless, I think Misadjustment in some ways is a capstone to a lot of the themes he was playing with. We have a population with a significant number of posthumans in it. We have those posthumans deemed a threat, and we have a state agency, a government agency, trying to round up these posthumans and get rid of them. And we have people worried that they'll be identified. The problem is this particular ability that people have, the mutation that people have in this world, makes it very difficult to identify and manage and even understand what's going on. Because they're called parakinetics, and what their ability is their own delusions are projected upon everyone else in the world. So if the parakinetic believes that they can fly, then people can fly in the world. And the boundaries between reality and fantasy become very muffled. And people start to fly, and the reason people can fly is because parakinetics, one parakinetic believes people can fly, and it's something that everyone can do. Of course, if you eliminate that parakinetic, that ability is taken away. Now, we got an interesting situation here where there's actually three groups of people. There are people who believe they're parakinetics but aren't, because they actually think they're looking at the world in a deluded way, and they have this ability, and what they see and what they experience, they think is a product of their own imagination. Then we have people who are parakinetics and don't believe it because, again, the things that are happening in real physical reality are reflections of their own deluded view of reality. And therefore, they don't know they're parakinetics. They just think it's normal that you fly. And that's the main character in the story, is one of these people. And then we have characters who know they're parakinetics and are on the run or whatever. And there's also a group of people called like immunes, that they're like the agents who go in and seek out the posthumans, the mutants, and they're special because they can kind of see through the projection of reality that the parakinetics impose on everyone else. So it's a very fascinating idea. It's very complex in a lot of ways, but it works really well in the story. It actually has a lot in common with Eye in the Sky, but in Eye in the Sky it was much more intimate. 8 people live a collective delusion created by one other person. And so the idea is the same, but here the parakinetics are able to project it upon everyone else. And then there's a really fascinating debate within the context of the story, and that is, what's the best way to handle this fact? Should we embrace democracy and let people have confidence in people's ability to decipher the real from the fake, and let that be the way we manage this world that's kind of slipping away and where reality is slipping away because of these parakinetics? Or do we trust the state agency? And the character at one point says, individually, each of us is fallible, but as a group, we can't go wrong. All we have to do is make sure that there's a random check net to get everyone, and we'll have to step the process up, get more people, and get them oftener. It has to be accelerated so that everyone sooner or later gets hauled in. So he thinks democracy is still compatible with this world, and other people think that's not true. Now, the reason it doesn't work is because the person who says that is a parakinetic himself and has created in the world the ability to fly for everyone. So the world's already, it's kind of the cat's out of the bag in a way. And the way to cipher between reality and fantasy is not possible anymore. So it's kind of got a pessimistic end, but depending on how you look on that, it's kind of interesting. It's, so many people's utopias and dreams, not silly dreams like flying, but dreams like, just being happy, or dreams of a good job, or dreams of a happy retirement. I mean, even relatively banal dreams become more and more seen as impossibilities in the world, right? That's the common statement that people make. I remember it from Mark Fisher's book, Capitalist Realism. I think it's the opening line of that book. It's easier to imagine the end of capitalism than it is, or easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And this is a statement on how our kind of utopian imagination has atrophied. And Dick here has kind of unlimited utopias are possible. And one character here believes that he can plant rocket ships and grow them in his garden and then fly off in them or whatever. Another person believes he can fly. And yeah, these are kind of silly examples of it, but I think the deeper truth here is maybe we should embrace a little bit more of the utopian speculation. Maybe there's hope in that people can dream and have a belief that those dreams can be real in the world, not just things that they ponder in their quiet moments. Anyway, so that's my comments on the stories Dick wrote in 1957. Again, there's just the two of them, the Unreconstructed M and Misadjustment. I will have a shorter video following this up where I'll look at Dick's sole publication from 1958, the Null, that short story. And then before I get into 1959, which was a bigger year for him in terms of publication. So thanks for watching. If you want more of my comments on these stories, including kind of a plot summary and some deeper analysis, you can go to my podcast, and those episodes will be up shortly, I believe. So you can check them out. But if not, just please subscribe to my channel and watch more of my videos on literature. I'll be looking at American writers broadly. I'm also be looking at some anarchist texts, and also providing some of my thoughts and musings on American literature and various kind of theory videos and things I'm thinking about as I'm reading broadly in American literature. So anyways, check out these stories. They're a lot of fun. I think they really are good capstones to some of Dick's concerns, and it's significant that they come really late in his short story career in a way. I mean, he'll revive it in 1963, but it seems he was putting to an end writing short stories for a while. It would be a while before he thought about coming back to the format of short story, and I don't quite know why he did that, but it's just, the way his career went out. He started writing novels. So anyways, there it is. So Misadjustment and the Unreconstructed M. Thanks again for watching.